Welcome to the Everybody Matters podcast. This show is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. Don't forget to connect with us on the web at barry-wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. How often do you consider your complete and total impact as a leader? How often do you think about the way your leadership impacts the lives of your team and the health of your organization? How often do you reevaluate yourself to see if there are any blind spots in your leadership? Amy Edmondson is a professor of leadership and management at Harvard Business School. She teaches teaming, psychological safety, and organizational learning. Her articles have been published in numerous academic and management outlets. And her most recent book is The Fearless Organization: Creating Psychological Safety in the Workplace for Learning, Innovation, and Growth. Amy recently participated in a webinar with Aaron Dimmock and Sara of our leadership consulting group, Chapman & Co. Leadership Institute, on leadership blind spots. Amy has also collaborated with Aaron on an article for Harvard Business Review on this topic as well. On this episode of the Everybody Matters podcast, you're going to hear an edited version of that discussion, where the three talk about how we can recognize and fill in the gaps of our leadership that may be unintentionally hurting our teams and our organizations. And we're going to start it off with Amy Edmondson.
We all have blind spots. Maybe you think you have a beautiful operatic voice, and really you don't. But we're talking about a very particular blind spot, which is blindness to the impact one has. And so it comes from that fundamental insight that is not ours, that is that we're all quite aware of our intentions. And by the way, we generally believe them to be very good. That's just, we're aware of them, but we're unaware of the impact our behavior, our action might have on others. Meanwhile, at the same time, and thickening the plot here, we are blind to others' intentions, which are also probably good, but quite aware of the impact, positive or negative, that they might be having on us. So, that creates this kind of fundamental mismatch, if you will. And yet, especially as a leader, whether of a team or a corporation, you are in a way responsible. I think in a powerful way, you're responsible for the impact you have. So that creates a conundrum, right? If I'm at least right off the bat blind to my impact, or at least potentially blind, and yet responsible for it, then I have an obligation to close that gap, right? To learn more, to develop more self-awareness.
Aaron, what would you add in from your, both from being a leader in the military, and so having a variety of experiences in that context, but also as you work with clients today?
Yeah, it's really fascinating because to Amy's point, and it was a phenomenal generative conversation to come up with this framework and something that she feels is additive for being able to help increase the self-awareness of leaders in certain positions, because there are things, absolutely, whether it's the business of the day, the demands internally on us, stressors going on at the time, like there's a ton that we are not aware of, and we are completely reliant on the observation and perspectives of other folks that are aware, and whether or not we create that environment within which they are willing and able to tell us and expose us or not. So yeah, this was a phenomenal conversation, and yeah, excited to keep moving forward with it.
Can you tell us a little bit about, because in some respects it's an easy question, but then it's a hard one to, like, why is self-awareness so hard? I know my intent. I was there when I exhibited the behavior.
Right.
Why is self-awareness so hard for people, therefore, and we'll talk about, okay, how do I close that gap? But what makes it so difficult?
Well, let me take a first stab at that, because I was just looking in the chat at Erica Neeson's
exactly
comment, and it's spot on. I mean, I think, and I'm not an evolutionary psychologist, but I think it's fair to conclude that this gap, this bias, has been with us for a very long time. It's kind of part of our wiring, if you will, and And I believe it exists to protect us, but unfortunately, it protects us from some of the very things that we need to actually have access to. And Erica points out that the blind spot seems, in her experience, connected with negative concepts or negative experiences or negative emotions, related to failure, shame, flaws, et cetera. And I think that's right. I mean, I think part of why we have them is to protect us from negative emotions. And of course, what it really just does is kick the negative emotions down the road, because they show up eventually when, worse things happen because we didn't catch and correct in the moment.
And just sharing, because I know Erica sent her note just to the panelists. Her comment was,
"Oh, I'm sorry."
No, it's fine.
No,
just
for
the context, I've noticed leaders' inability to recognize blind spots is an inability to deal with negative concepts such as failure, shame, flaws, etc. But this extends to many of us. We focus on leadership, but the issue goes deeper into our kind of penchant for kind of faking it until you make it, success at all costs. And the question was, how can we begin to impact on a deeper level beyond leadership, a change to accept that failures are necessary, literally part of the human condition and must be experienced.
Yeah, and they're part of the human condition, and they're also part of the VUCA world condition, right? We live in, and it's never been more obvious than it is today, we live in a volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world. So like it or not, and we don't much, things will go wrong, right? There will be failure, there will be error, there will be problems.
So a question we have coming into the Q&A, are blind spots and ego related, and then how so?
Well, I think, as I was saying before, they're ego protective, right? But possibly not in the most, well, definitely not in the most fulfilling way, right? I mean, I think there's there's ego, and especially the way we colloquially use the term ego, which is often, it seems like, boastful, or he has a big ego, we will say, versus the kind of psychological notion of ego development, which is about developing greater humility, greater self-awareness, and because of that, greater competence as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question about, and this is something we've all experienced, if someone gets feedback about a blind spot and they don't change, you could argue it's no longer a blind spot, it's a known spot. What's the next step?
I think that's such a general, I mean, it may be, I'm not sure I can answer it as a one size fits all answer. But Aaron, this is in a way the work you do. So what thoughts do you have?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And thanks, Amy, because I think there's also a function of this, that there's a part of us that we have to operate this way. As you said, some of it's a survival. Some of it is of all the people that are exposed to us, like we would literally cripple the team because we're all just offering perspectives to each other and nothing gets done. So that definitely shows a limitation. Right. But yeah, this is where it really gets challenging. Even if we've brought it to the attention and the other person is not receptive to what it is we're saying, like that can be really, really hard. And then we just continue to live in some frustration. Because just as we have the opportunity to humbly offer our perspective in a candid way, they also have the opportunity to discount it and not listen. Right. I wish there was an easy answer here, but continuing to nurture the relationship, those individual human interactions, as you talk about, because psych safety, and as Sara mentioned, I know we'll get to it, but because it's a group level phenomenon, it's so resident in the interpersonal interactions. Like that's what makes it happen at the group level. And in the absence of that, it just makes it really tough. So I think continuing to nurture the relationship, do things, individual human interactions to support that group level phenomenon of psych safety, it takes a lot of effort with certain folks. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I just realized what we might be talking about here is motivation. And sure. So what the question in a sense implies is that there's no real motivation to change. I mean, it might be inability, but it might also be like, why should I?
Yep.
And so then that says at least the solution might have to connect to something that person wants to do, wants to get done, and cannot without changing this issue. And helping someone see that you can't get what you really want done
correct without
changing this. then I think, and especially for leadership, like if you really want people to follow you and show up for work energized and creative to do a good job, and you keep showing up the way you show up, it just won't happen.
That's exactly
right.
How much you
perhaps I don't understand the impact. I got the feedback.
Exactly.
The person didn't deliver. Here was the situation.
Right. I didn't know the connection. Yeah. I don't know how it really connects to the goal that I have.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So another question in the Q&A, are blind spots in the eye of the watcher? In other words, are they subjective and based on the viewer? I think our phrase for this would be, your perspective is your truth. I saw some behavior one way, you saw it completely different. So any thoughts on that piece and how to reconcile? We just had different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, I think they are in the eye of the observer, but but the fact is we all have them, right? We do have blind spots. It doesn't, some of them are more or less important, but that question brings up the whole notion of the ladder of inference, right? Where, and this is what it's neither bad nor good. We just do it. We have, we might have different perspectives. We do have different perspectives. And the reason we have different perspectives at the top of whatever ladder is, we're at least initially, we're drawing from slightly different data, right? And that data is, and by data, I mean, everything from someone's facial expression to, formal data. But we're drawing from different data, then we're making different inferences, and we're applying different reasoning, and then we get to where we have a view. And the other person selected slightly different data out of all the myriad data that are available, made slightly different inferences, had different reasoning, and then we get up and we say, well, this is just my view. Absolutely. And you're responsible for walking back down the ladder to get to that original, and this is why. This is what I think, but this is why. Like when you cut that person off, blah, 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 right? It's like you're trying to explain the inference you made, whereas the person cutting off might think, I cut off because it was such a great point and I wanted to build on it, right? Right? I mean, this kind of thing happens all the time.
What's the underlying need that drove the behavior? And then I might understand your need more than I understand your behavior.
Yeah, and what's the motivation and what did you have in mind when the behavior is going to be interpreted, behavior is the data, that's interpreted differently by different people, depending on what's going on in their head, et cetera, et cetera.
Another question, are blind spots learned or are they with us all along?
I'd go for all along. What about you, Aaron?
Yeah, for sure. We have them, and these are great questions because this is actually part of what Amy and I talked about a few months ago, and the reason for why we can have blind spots and why self-awareness is elusive. And not to belabor the points here, but there are many. There's tons of research on self-deception from the Arbinger Institute, from defensive reasoning from Chris Ardress and his work over the last couple of decades. Self-serving bias, where we attribute our successes to our own ability and the failures to something external and beyond our control, to the Dunning-Kruger effect. Like there are different elements that actually fuel why we literally are incapable of viewing some of these things, that we're dependent on the other person that's seeing them to make us aware of them. So there's a ton there.
And this links to a question in here on how, one, can we distinguish between that's just my opinion of you versus it's a true blind spot. And so how do we define what a true blind spot is versus lots of people have opinions about our behavior?
This is leading me to think we have to be more sharp on our definition of blind spot. Like a blind spot is a given. That doesn't, in other words, we don't start out with 100% full awareness of all aspects of ourself and others, right? I mean, I might be blind to your desire to make a difference, for example. I might just not really be aware of it. So we all have, we have a million blind spots, but this very fundamental one about just no easy access to the impact we're having without reaching out to learn more about it. So I don't think this term is best used for kind of identifying other people's weaknesses. It's best used for motivating our own personal growth or leadership development aims, right? Because
Yeah.
it shouldn't become yet a new tool. A new weapon, I'm sorry.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. It should be an entree into a conversation. And for folks that I think to fine tune it. So thanks for the question for sure. As Amy's talking about zeroing in on the impact our behavior is having on others that we may not be aware of, even referencing things like the Johari window, where it's known to others and unknown to us. That's the baseline definition. Right. And you're seeing something that I'm not. And so having that conversation and using that as the vehicle, the mechanism to help with that would be tremendous. That would be the goal, I think. Would you agree, Amy?
Yeah. And sometimes, thank God, but sometimes people see something in us we don't see in ourselves that's a good thing.
That's right.
They see that we have leadership potential, or that we have,
Totally.
that we're more articulate or good at something than we ourselves know that we can be. And then they often serve a powerful role of getting us in a new direction.
Without a doubt.
New opportunity.
Yeah.
This begs the question, are we have a little deeper understanding of what blind spots are? So how do we discover them? What do we do about it? And I know the bulk of the article is really around what are kind of the choices that we have. And so I'm going to bring up the model just so that we have a visual for people to see. And Amy, if you wouldn't mind just kind of walking us through this model.
Absolutely. So as Erin and I spoke about this a while back, we identified two dimensions. Like, when people like Erin and like many of you and occasionally me go into organizations to try to do any kind of leadership development work or interpersonal development work, we have fundamentally two choices, and we thought it was worth identifying them. One is, are we targeting individuals? This is the horizontal dimension here, or are we targeting teams? Am I going to go in and work with Aaron, help him become a better leader, or am I going to go in and work with Aaron's leadership team or other team? That's an important, and you would make that decision, based on various goals and the context. We can talk more about that. The other is, should this be sort of experiential learning, meaning we're going to give you an activity, an exercise, a classroom experience where you gain insight, or should this be in the context of real work? So we call that experience-based versus discussion-based, meaning I'm going to come in and watch Aaron lead his senior team, and and give him some feedback later as a coach, or I'm going to go in and be a skilled facilitator during that meeting to have the whole team be sort of learning together about how to be more open, more direct, more self-aware, and so forth. So, and those two dimensions give rise to these four kind of archetype intervention choices, right? Where the experience-based individual participation is best captured by work that our friend and colleague Jim Dieter does at the UVA, and others do similar things, but really taking individual executives or MBA students and putting them in a lab and putting them in a kind of a challenging interaction, and giving them all sorts of feedback with even biometric data and video playback, and really just helping them get much more aware of themselves and how they come across. Whereas team simulation, which can be a lot of fun, is putting real teams, intact teams, but through experiential learning exercises, whether those are sort of classroom-based or outdoor experiential learning based, to have them get new insights about how they work together in a kind of offline setting where they're more open. And I think coach speaks for itself, and similarly, the skilled facilitator notion speaks for itself too.
I think either Amy or Erin, can you give us kind of an example of a company or a team, which of these they picked, and then what was the results?
Yeah, I'm happy to lead with this one, Amy, if that's all right with you.
Sure, please. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. So the skilled facilitator team dialogue practice session discussion-based area for the team participation. Chapman and Co-Leadership Institute recently, a few of our team members had the opportunity to conduct a diversity and inclusion survey and then go in and have that conversation with the executive leadership team of this particular client. And based on the findings and that conversation, they ended up becoming aware of a pay disparity between some of their employees. And literally, it wasn't overnight, but after continued conversation and figuring out what that could look like, now they have pay parity and pay equity throughout their organization because that increased awareness that those leaders didn't, it was a blind spot for them. They didn't necessarily see it. The D&I survey brought on the conversation that enabled them to actually enact a decision and make change. So that's one example recently that the Chapman & Co. Leadership Institute has taken part in. How about you, Amy?
That's a great example. I would say that most of the organizations with which I do a lot of the what I would call team simulation experiences. I've in fact developed a simulation that's a pretty powerful way of looking at leadership team decision making, and what that has done is a kind of aha moment that then really. It sends people, it gives them the motivation, I guess it was a comment about in the chat about being, the sort of the difference between becoming aware of a need to change and then actually changing is found in motivation. And the great thing about the simulation is that they have an actual experience of thinking they're doing great. And then maybe not doing so great. And then they get curious about why, which real life doesn't give as many of those experiences because a lot of times the performance happens so much later, it's disconnected from the behavior. But I would say, and we're not really arguing pick one for your whole company at all times.
That's
we're
right.
really saying, here's your toolkit. Think carefully about which tool is going to be most useful to you, most aligned with your goals and constraints at the moment. So I think an ideal scenario is that a particular company is doing a little bit of everything, depending on who and where.
Yeah.
If we could, I'd like to transition a little bit from, and these ideas are connected, blind spots. Am I getting feedback on my blind spots? I'm far more likely to get that feedback if I operate in an environment of psychological safety. People feel free to tell me, hey, you might not be aware of this, but you consistently display this behavior. Right. And so lots of questions coming in. I think we kind of gave the definition of psychological safety for those not familiar. It's really the belief that the work environment is safe for interpersonal risk. But Amy, anything that you would add to that before we kind of get into the questions? We all have the same definition.
I've recently been aware of a lot of dialogue and debate out there about, well, psychological safety is all well and good, but really, the great organizations have brutal candor. So I say, okay. In fact, I'm never a fan of brutality in any context, right? Yeah. I don't think brutal is what we want to be, because brutal implies I know, I'm omniscient, and you have gaps. And the reality is we both have gaps, right? So what I've been thinking about recently is accountable candor, right? So psychological safety, you asked me to elaborate. I think it's about creating conditions where we can be candid. It doesn't make it easy, but it makes it expected. It makes it valued. And yet I can't just stand here throwing, grenades at you. Sorry, Aaron, that's like a bad metaphor from your background, but I can't do that, right? I need to be accountable for the impact, right? And I need to, so I need to sort of, in fact, the great recommendation is always I messages, and that's not just a line, right? That's really a powerful insight, because when I stand here saying, well, you are dismissive or you whatever, I don't know really. All I know is how I experience it. And I'm not saying you have to say, oh, I experience you as. I'm saying I got upset when I saw you do X, right? So it's the I'm sharing with you the data I have, that only I have, because it's the data of my reaction. But meanwhile, I really need you to share with me the data you have.
Yeah. So both and for those not familiar, iMessage, First person, we teach it as feelings, behavior, impact. FBI is an easy way to remember it. And then the second step after I deliver that message is I have to listen. Because you might have data that I don't have, and perhaps I'm wrong, perhaps I missed it, but I am going to express feelings, behavior, and impact. Interesting question coming in. Are there times when psychological safety is used improperly? Can it be overused? What happens when we over-index, or can we even over-index on psych safety?
I think just about anything can be used improperly. In that, what I mean by that is it can be used as a weapon. You know, like we're supposed to have psychological safety, and you're whatever, not creating it. But the you know, psychological safety is an emergent property. It's not a tool that you can just, you know, flick the switch and have it. It's an emergent property that emerges when various conditions are present. You know, there's a sort of a spirit of shared interest in purposefulness around the work. You know, there's an awareness that it's challenging. It's not a simple matter of everybody. If everybody just did their job, it would all be fine. But rather, our work is complex and interdependent and so forth. So there's all of that helps give rise to, and a spirit of inquiry and curiosity that helps give rise to psychological safety. But yes, so I don't believe, I'm often asked this, Sarah, but I don't believe you can have too much psychological safety. I do believe you can have not enough discipline, right? Meaning in a work group, right? I just don't think fear is ever a particularly useful, or interpersonal fear.
Yeah.
I mean, we can be afraid of the enemy, or we can be afraid of missing a deadline. That's fine. But I don't think if we're afraid of each other, and I'm going to hold back on my true idea because I think you might laugh at me, then I just don't think there's any real value in that. But it certainly can be misused if people sort of use it as a way of criticizing each other.
That's right.
And we would encourage people, if you're not familiar with Project Aristotle, you can Google it. They have a lot of great open source. Psychological safety, we asked a Mentimeter, is number one. Number two is dependability. So to this kind of structure element and structures in there as well. And so to say, yes, I want this environment, but also I do care that you get the stuff that you said you were going to do to me on time. There's other factors at play, right?
That's a good way of thinking about the horizontal dimension in a way. If psychological safety is the vertical dimension, and of course the kind of workplace we want to be in is one that's psychologically safe and each other is dependable. Right. And then that's where great work is happening.
Yep, I need both. So linked to this, and I'm sure that you probably get this question a lot. There are empathetic, self-aware, emotionally intelligent employees and organizations that do excellent job creating a psychological safe environment. Those are not always the same people who get promoted. And so how can we impact organizations to value these elements as linked to the business? We know that psychologically safe environments, you see higher innovation, you see lower safety incidences. This is well documented. So why is it that the business kind of community, the ethos isn't, that's what we're looking for in leaders. We want leaders who get results.
It's a very deep question, right? If you think about it, if the question is, you know, why is it that we in the business community often fail to do the right thing, and particularly in promotion decisions. I mean, that we oftentimes we have this experience that people get ahead who are not necessarily the ones who are making the most difference for the shared enterprise, right? And there's quite a few forces operating to make that happen. I think one is the old phrase, kiss up and kick down. I mean, that some people are better at managing they spend effort managing the impression that higher ups have of them, and don't necessarily create psychological safety for their teams. I think increasingly well-run organizations have some version of, the 9 block, or some version of living the values is an important part of your promotion, not just your numbers or what have you. But so one is their ability to kind of impression manage, and not always an authentic way. Another is our short-termism, that sometimes the people who seem to be performing really well in the short term are are not necessarily the ones that are building the capacity in the organization for the organization to thrive in the longer term. And so, there's a bunch of forces that lead us to not always act in our best collective interest.
Yeah. And kind of switching gears a little bit, kind of back to the current environment, there's a question around the current political climate. I would add in there COVID, certainly the racial tension that we've been experiencing in the US and around the world. We've got a lot of stress and anxiety and pressure. So any tips related to bringing that tension down? How do I make people feel more psychologically safe when the world does not feel so psychologically safe right now?
Yeah, it sure doesn't. And that's all the more reason to create the pockets. Psychological safety is always a local phenomenon, right? It's and by local, I really mean your team, your immediate set of colleagues, whether they are reached by Zoom or face to face, the way they used to be. You feel psychologically safe when you are in a good group. A group that is dependable and passionate and seems to care about you and care about what you have to say. So I think what it is you can do to answer that question is come clean. Be constantly saying, "Wow, this is hard, right? This is hard, but hey, I know we can do it." And the expressing both the nature of the challenge, the nature of the uncertainty creates a rationale for why you truly believe others' voices are needed. Proactively inviting input, asking good questions, taking the time to listen intently, that communicates again that I value you, but it also literally gives you a stage for your voice, a kind of, and then always responding in an empathic, thoughtful way to bad news or to challenges is helps us create these bubbles of psychological safety where we can do our best work. And even though the world is pretty challenging right now. Now, there was for the panelists, Monty Peterson wrote, "I can understand the qualities of EO and psych safety, but you can't discount technical ability, nor would we want to, right? Neither Aaron nor I would be at all interested in that. In fact, that's another version of a 2x2.
That's right.
That you could easily draw. Where we want people with technical ability and willing to learn and keep improving their technical ability. We also want an environment where they can use that technical ability to its best and highest use."
Absolutely.
I want to hear Aaron's thoughts as well on kind of what are some specific ways people can kind of create these pockets of psychological safety. I think one that I would add to the list is what's the system or structure where you're calling out all the things that are going right. And so for our last year as a team, every week on a Friday, a member of our leadership team was sending out just in this week, here is the laundry list of everything that went right. There's plenty. There are challenges we can talk about, but here's small things, big things, whatever it was, here's the whole list of everything that went right, and it just goes out, and it's just bullets, so that people start to feel like, okay, it's not all bad. Aaron, anything else that you would add to that, add to the list?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Nothing specifically, because I'd love to pull that and to connect it back to what Amy said. Like the blind spots works on the positive side too. Like you may have done something that really helped someone out. For you, it was not a big deal. But then them providing, like you said, for us on our team, when we provide each other that recognition, it's almost an aha moment for us that we didn't know that we had a positive impact on somebody else. So the fact that we have that we value it in each other and reinforce our values and then provide each other that at the end of each week, it's absolutely, for some of us, it's airing a positive blind spot as well. So no, that's an awesome example.
All right, one last question from the Q&A, and then we're going to do a little lightning round with you. We've got some questions for you. But this from our good friend, Gary Morris. How do we make time for this, or how do we wrestle with, we'll use the context of urgent versus important. I have so many things that are so urgent right now, both from a home standpoint, a work standpoint. an email standpoint, which most of us get sucked into. So what are some tips or tricks or maybe a mindset that you can offer that says, if I don't do this work, I'm actually making all that stuff harder? How do we make time for this personal development, finding our blind spots?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely, you brought up the urgent important matrix, which, by the way, I only learned this year is called the Eisenhower matrix.
It is. Yeah.
But that's, I mean, that's, and it's an important model because what it says is we are at risk. Human beings are at risk of letting the urgent crowd out the important. And the matrix gives us that insight into that. And the reason it's a useful tool is because it reminds us that we have to not do that, right? That we have to make sure we're investing enough time in the important, because the important is what creates long-term value, future value. The urgent is what sort of gets us through this week. And there are many things one could say about how do you help, how do you make enough room in the list of the urgents to have room for the important. And one is obviously delegate, right? One is make sure that the things, two big ideas, right? One, make sure that the things that need to be done, but that could be done by someone else, possibly as even a developmental opportunity, are being done by someone else and not by you, even if you think you're the very best person at doing that thing. And then the other is being pretty tough on, is that thing really necessary? Just because it's urgent doesn't mean it actually is value adding. And so some of the things that we tend to feel as urgent could actually just go off the list altogether. And that's the discipline.
Yeah. Hard to do. Easy says hard to do.
Yep. So hard to do.
For all of us.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to find out more about the work of Chapman & Co. Leadership Institute, go to ccoleadership.com. You can find them on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter as well. And if you'd like to find out more about our CEO, Bob Chapman, and Ross Zodia's book, Everybody Matters, The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family, go to everybodymattersbook.com. And for updates on the book, this podcast, and for a lot of great content and insight, don't forget to connect with us on the web at Barry-Wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks again for listening. Take care.